In previous videos I covered the history of the nations in the Tauran and Dunan regions of the northern continent. You can find links to those videos covering the history of the Scarlet Moon Empire, the city-states of Joustin and the Highland Kingdom in the description below. This time we're going to be heading south and we'll be covering the history of the Kooluk Empire, who are situated in the southernmost tip of the northern continent, as well as the nations of the Kuknasi Sea, which include the Island Nations Federation and the Dukedom of Gaien. I'll be covering all three nations as their history is closely tied together, much in the same way that the history of the city-states of Joustin and the Highland Kingdom were. But unlike with the previous videos where I ended the video as the events of the games began, I'll be covering the war from Suikoden 4 as well as the events of Suikoden Tactics, as these nations' backstories aren't as fully fleshed out as their northern neighbours. I won't be going super in depth into the events of Suikoden 4 and Tactics. Instead, I'll be providing condensed summaries of the overall events of those two games. So let's get into the history of the Kooluk Empire, the Dukedom of Gaien and the Island Nations Federation. The creation of the rune cannons. The earliest known event in the region happened on the island of Middleport in the solar year 287, when the magician Warlock, during one of his magical experiments, summoned a creature known as the giant tree from another world. The seeds that grew on the giant tree were teeming with magical power, and Warlock would discover a way to harness the seeds' power by combining them with elemental runes to create powerful explosive shells known as rune shells. The rune shells would serve as the ammunition for another of his inventions, a terrifying weapon known as a rune cannon. Warlock would craft the rune cannons using parts of creatures that he had summoned from other worlds, the most notable part being the fisheye, which would be used as the lens of the cannon. The destructive power of the rune cannons would quickly change the face of warfare in the region, with rune cannons being fitted on all vessels in the region over the course of the next 10 years. Use of rune cannons weren't without risk, however, as damaged rune cannons had a high risk of exploding and severely wounding or killing those around them, and those who were in frequent close proximity of the rune cannons would often become very ill. Over time, Warlock would grow to regret ever creating such a devastating weapon. The same experiments that brought the giant tree into the world would also summon a human goat-like being called Yon into the world. Yon would lose her ability to speak while in this new world and would wander the world, scared and alone for some time, until she met a man called Walter, who was an officer of the Scarlet Moon Empire. The two would grow close and eventually fall in love. Walter would soon realise that Yon appeared in the world at the same time that the rune cannons appeared, and would set out to begin an investigation into the rune cannons along with his companions. Pirate attack on the Kingdom of Obel. The earliest known conflict in the region happened in the solar year 292, when the Kingdom of Obel was attacked by pirates. The Queen of Obel was on board a ship at the time of the attack, along with her two children, the Princess Flare and the Prince Laszlo, or Razro if you prefer. The Queen, in an act of desperation to protect her children, would summon the Rune of Punishment, one of the 27 true runes, to aid her. The rune had been sealed away in the runes of Obel due to its cursed nature, which grants its bearer devastating destructive power in exchange for draining its bearer's life. The rune would attach itself to the Queen, who used its power to destroy the pirate ships. Prince Laszlo, who was just a baby at the time of the attack, would be thrown overboard from the blast caused by the Rune of Punishment, and would be lost at sea during the battle, where he was presumed dead. The young prince, however, would miraculously survive, and would be found adrift at sea by a Gaien patrol ship, where he would be brought to the island of Razril and taken in by the local lord Vincent Fingerhut, to be raised as a companion and friend for his son Snow. The Queen of Obel passed away shortly after due to the effects of the Rune of Punishment, which would then pass to an unknown bearer and be lost for a number of years. Kirill, the son of Walter and Yon, would be born on this year. The Gaien Kooluk War. In the solar year 299, the Dukedom of Gaien and the Kooluk Empire would go to war. Little details are known about the war itself, but the Gaien fleet appear to have gained early victories during the conflict, pushing the Kooluk fleets all the way back to Elil Fortress. A large battle would then take place between the Gaien and Kooluk fleets off the coast of Elil Fortress. The Gaien navy was comprehensively defeated thanks to the skill and leadership of Troy, the commander of the Kooluk First Fleet, who defeated 4 Gaien ships with just 1 ship. This battle would earn Troy the nickname Child of the Sea God, a name which he would grow to resent. The remaining Gaien ships would retreat back to Gaien territory where Gaien survivors would tell stories of Troy's prowess, and he would come to not only be feared, but be regarded with awe. The Kooluk Empire would quickly launch a counterattack, pursuing the Gaien fleet and capturing the Gaien colony of Middleport. During their occupation of Middleport, the Kooluk forces would discover the giant tree that Warlock had summoned 12 years ago. They would manage to subdue the tree, load it onto one of their ships, and transport it back to Elil Fortress, where they would begin to perform experiments on it. Kooluk would agree to withdraw from Middleport and put an end to the conflict on the condition that Middleport be granted independence from Gaien. Following Middleport's independence from Gaien, Kooluk would begin to engage in trade with Middleport and secure important materials needed for the construction and maintenance of rune cannons and rune shells. After their bitter defeat at the hands of Kooluk, the Gaien monarchy would begin to lose power as the power of the regional lords in the nation would increase. The Gaien nobility would become more focused on self-preservation and were interested only in their own profit as opposed to the betterment of their nation. The royal family would now rule in name only, and the nation would begin to function more as a republic. The Dukedom of Gaien would then begin to lose interest in the islands on their eastern border, with Razril suffering from poor crop harvests and their iron mines now tapped out. Conflicts between Kooluk and Scarlet Moon. Following the conflict with the Dukedom of Gaien, tensions began to rise between the Kooluk Empire and the Scarlet Moon Empire to the north. The two nations would engage in frequent skirmishes over disputed territories and villages along the borders of their nations. After several skirmishes along the border, this conflict would finally come to an end thanks to a tense ceasefire agreement. However, not everyone was happy with the ceasefire agreement. Some nobles within the Scarlet Moon Empire who had gained distinction during the conflict with Kooluk were unhappy with the truce agreement, and eventually their discontent would turn into anger. These nobles would lead hunting raids along the border with Kooluk while disguised as Kooluk soldiers, where they would attack villages on their own side of the border and hunt people for sport. An action done for the purpose of reigniting the conflict between the two nations and placing the blame on Kooluk. These events became known as the Manhunting Incident. Eleanor Silverberg, the Scarlet Moon Empire's strategist, would soon recognize what was happening, and that it was her own country's nobles who were responsible for the raids. She would demand an immediate halt to the raids by the nobles, but the nobles seemingly denying responsibility as eyewitness accounts would point the blame at Kooluk, would continue the raids. Eventually, these nobles would raid a village of such insignificance that it didn't even have a name, but would become known as the Small Border Village. This village was home to a man called Graham Cray, a tactician in the Scarlet Moon Empire who served under the strategist Eleanor Silverberg. Sometime before the raid occurred, the Rune of Punishment, which was previously held by the Queen of Obel, would come into the possession of Graham Cray. Graham would chop his arm off to rid himself of the rune, and the rune would then immediately transfer itself into Graham Cray's son. During one of the Scarlet Moon nobles' manhunting raids, they would target Graham's village. Graham's son would use the rune's power to defend the village. However, he lost control of the rune, and the rune would kill not only the attackers, but many of the villagers as well. He himself would die in the process. Believing Graham to be guilty of what transpired in the village, he would be banished from the Scarlet Moon Empire, and Eleanor Silverberg, who was unaware of the true events that occurred, was discharged from Imperial service, presumably being blamed for the actions of her subordinate. With the nobles responsible for these hunting raids now dead, no more cases of manhunting were reported after this incident, and the truce agreement would hold for some time. The two nations, however, would continue to engage in a Cold War, as they resorted to plots and schemes attempting to sow discord within each other. Around this time, Walter and his companions arrive on the Gaien colony of Razril as they search for information about the true nature of the rune cannons. Here they discover the first known sighting of a fishman, a person who had been turned into a fish monster by an unknown pirate using a modified rune cannon known as an Evil Eye. This same pirate was now in the possession of the Rune of Punishment and has begun terrorizing the seas. Construction of the Giant Rune Cannon. Kooluk's capture of the giant tree and their experiments into it paid off as they developed and constructed a giant rune cannon which would be built into Elil Fortress. This cannon was so powerful that it was capable of destroying entire fleets of ships with a single shot, and even reaching islands many miles away. The installation of this giant rune cannon would make Elil Fortress virtually impossible to attack. The Evil Eye. Walter's investigation into the rune cannons continued as he and his companions arrived on the island of Middleport. Shortly after departing the island, they would engage the pirate Steele in battle alongside the pirates Brando and Edgar who had been hunting Steele. Steele had been terrorizing the seas for years with the Rune of Punishment and his modified rune cannon known as an Evil Eye, which could turn people into mindless fishmen. During this battle, Walter would be turned into a fishman by the Evil Eye, and his son Kirill would be severely wounded. Peck, a young pirate under Brando's command, would be mutilated and disfigured as he was turned into a half-human, half-fishman from an exploding rune cannon. Steele and Edgar would lose their lives during this battle, and the Rune of Punishment would then transfer itself into Brando. The Island Liberation War. In the solar year 306, the Kooluk Empire was struggling. The citizens were living in poverty and the Empire regularly suffered from food shortages. Tensions were rising within the Empire between the Imperial faction and the Patriarchal faction. The Imperial faction consisted of members of the Imperial family who believed that the Emperor and his family alone ruled the Empire, while the Patriarchal faction was comprised of non-imperial officers and nobles who ran the day-to-day internal policies of the Empire. As tensions began to ease between Kooluk and Scarlet Moon, Graham Cray, a former tactician of the Scarlet Moon Empire, would offer his services to the governor of Elil, who was a member of Kooluk's Imperial faction. The governor had ambitions of conquering the island nations to the south, and together with Graham Cray, they would formulate a plan to invade the islands without the permission of the Emperor. A plan that they would name the Southern Expansion Policy, but Graham had ulterior motives for offering his assistance. Around this time, the pirate Brando would attack a Gaien ship from the island of Razril, which was captained by Snow Vingerhut. Snow, in an act of cowardice and fear, would abandon ship and leave all of his comrades behind. Laszlo, who acted as Snow's second-in-command, would assume control of the ship and engage Brando in battle. Snow would be found rowing away on a dinghy by his commander Glenn Cott, who chastised him for abandoning his post and rushed to the rescue of his comrades. Glenn arrived just as Laszlo had defeated Brando in combat, and the Rune of Punishment would then transfer itself into Glenn. Shortly after, a large pirate fleet would attack Razril. Glenn would use the rune's power to repel the pirate fleet, but in the process would lose his life. Laszlo and Snow would arrive just in time to witness Glenn's death. The Rune of Punishment would then transfer itself into Laszlo, and Snow would then lay the blame for Glenn's death on Laszlo, leading to Laszlo's exile from Razril. Following his exile from Razril, Laszlo would eventually end up in the Kingdom of Obel. The governor of Elil would now begin his invasion of the island nations. However, he lacked the ability to command and would delegate command to Graham Cray, who intended to begin the invasion by firing the giant rune cannon in Elil at Eluya Island. This plan was strongly protested against by Try, the commander of the Kooluk First Fleet. Despite Try's protests, the governor would give the go-ahead to fire the cannon. The firing of the giant rune cannon would result in the destruction of Eluya's town and the deaths of almost all of its inhabitants. The Kooluk Empire would then establish a forward base on the island following the settlement's destruction. The destruction of Aluya was followed by a swift invasion of the Kingdom of Obel by the Kooluk fleet. Kooluk's first assault was soundly defeated thanks to Laszlo's use of the Rune of Punishment. However, a second wave assault by the Kooluk First Fleet led by Troy and the Kooluk Second Fleet led by Colton quickly overwhelmed Obel's fleet and they took control of the island, but not before Laszlo and King Lino and Kulas could escape aboard the Dauntless. After the conquest of Obel, Colton's Second Fleet would remain stationed there while Troy would lead his fleet northeast to the island of Nanal. There, the chieftain of the island's human settlement would quickly enter into an alliance with Kooluk. Troy would station a garrison on the island and the remainder of his fleet would return to El Fortress. At the same time Troy led his fleet towards Nanal, a Kooluk fleet under the command of Helmut, who was the son of Colton, would attack the island of Razril. The Dukedom of Gaien would choose not to send aid to Razril out of fear of escalating tensions with Kooluk. With no aid from Gaien in sight, the Knights of Gaien, now under the command of Snow Vingerhut, would surrender the island without a fight and the Razril fleet would be incorporated into the Kooluk fleet and be named the Kooluk Mixed Fleet. Snow would then be appointed as the head of Kooluk's anti-pirate task force. With Graham Cray now having established himself as the authority figure for the invasion, he would secretly imprison the governor, claiming his absence was due to illness, and Graham would then assume total control of El Fortress. After Laszlo and Lino's retreat from Obel, they would encounter the pirate Kika and form an alliance before being attacked by Snow Vingerhut, the commander of the Kooluk Anti-Piracy Task Force. Following Snow's swift and decisive defeat, he would attempt to retreat to Razril where the inhabitants would revolt and shoot fire arrows at his ship, denying his entry and forcing him to flee. Laszlo and Lino would then recruit Eleanor Silverberg, the former strategist of the Scarlet Moon Empire, into their ranks. Eleanor would advise Laszlo to travel to each of the islands to gain their support. The Lord of Middleport refused to join the Allied fleet, but he also would not impede their activities on the island, choosing instead to play both sides of the conflict to profit from the war. Laszlo would then travel to Nanal, who would initially refuse to join, but after a plot from the elves to poison the Kooluk soldiers stationed on the island, the chieftain of Nanal would eventually switch sides and join the Allied fleet when the Kooluk soldiers began killing the villagers in retaliation. After securing the alliances of Nanal and Ney Island, the Allied fleet would set sail to liberate Razril, where they would face off against the Kooluk Mixed Fleet under the command of Helmut. Helmut's fleet would be quickly defeated as the Knights of Gaien would switch sides and join the Allied fleet during the battle, liberating Razril and increasing the Allied fleet's strength. The Allied fleet would then set their sights on liberating the Kingdom of Obel. Colton would attempt to hide some of his fleet in the wharf to perform a pincer move and take the Allied fleet by surprise. His plan would fail as Eleanor Silverberg had a message delivered to Princess Flair, who remained on Obel after it was taken by Kooluk. Flair led the people of the island to capture the ships lying in wait. With Colton now outnumbered, he was easily defeated and taken prisoner, and his ships commandeered by the Allied fleet. With the islands now liberated, Eleanor would come up with a plan to attack El and destroy the giant rune cannon to bring an end to the conflict. Eleanor would send false reports to the Scarlet Moon Empire, notifying them of Kooluk plans to invade. This was simply a ruse to divert Kooluk's attention away from the island nation's upcoming assault on El. Her plan was a success, and the Scarlet Moon Empire began to move their troops into defensive positions along their southern border, which the Kooluk Empire mistook as plans for a Scarlet Moon invasion, and promptly moved their army to defend their northern border. With the Kooluk army's attention now elsewhere, Eleanor would utilise the remnants of the Kooluk Second Fleet by sailing them towards El in the fog, which the El garrison mistook as the island's fleet, and would fire the giant cannon without verifying their target. This would give the island nations a 2-hour window to launch their attack on El before the cannon could fire again. The island's fleet would be led by Eleanor's apprentice Agnes, who engaged the Kooluk First Fleet being led by Tri, while Laszlo led a small group to sneak into the fortress and destroy the giant tree once and for all. Here it is where Graham's true plans were revealed. He wished to regain the Rune of Punishment so that he may relive its memories of his son. Following the destruction of the giant tree and Eliel fortress by the island forces, Tri would challenge Laszlo to a duel and was defeated. Shortly after the destruction of Eliel, the island nations and the Kooluk Empire signed a peace agreement. Lino and Kuldes, the king of Obel, then declared the formation of the Island Nations Federation and was chosen as the Federation's first chairman. After the foundation of the Island Nations Federation, the Knights of Gaien would be renamed as the Knights of Razril and would be led by Katarina, the daughter of the former commander Glen Cott. And Laszlo, who bore the Rune of Punishment, would choose to live in isolation on a deserted island to protect people from the Rune's curse that he was unaware he had broken. The fall of the Kooluk Empire. Following the failure of the southern expansion policy, tensions would boil over and conflicts would begin between the imperial and patriarchal factions within the Kooluk Empire, causing civil unrest and destabilizing the already weakened nation. Kirill would recover from the injuries he sustained 2 years ago during his battle with the pirate Steel, and would continue his father's investigation into the nature of the rune cannons. Kirill and his group would encounter a man named Iskis on the island of Middleport, who claimed to be a merchant. Iskis would briefly join Kirill during his investigation as they searched Warlock's underground laboratory. Iskis was able to capture an eye fish, which he would use to create an evil eye, a modified version of a rune cannon that could turn people into mindless fishmen. Iskis's true identity was that of a high-ranking member of the Kooluk patriarchal faction, who was intending to use the evil eye to seize control of the Empire by force. Kirill would continue his investigation, which would lead him into the heartland of Kooluk, where he would meet a young girl named Kerselia, the princess of Kooluk who had fled from the clutches of Iskis. Throughout their journey together, Kerselia would discover the corruption, poverty, and food shortages that were plaguing the Empire. Iskis had been seducing the Princess Miranda, who was the mother of Kerselia and the wife of Crown Prince Martin, who had been neglecting his wife in favour of his military career. Iskis planned to kill the Emperor and the Crown Prince, and then marry Miranda where he would rule as regent from behind the scenes. As Kirill's investigations continued, he would find himself along the Kooluk Scarlet Moon border. There he would discover that the Kooluk Empire had begun to adapt the rune cannons for land warfare by deploying them along their northern border with the Scarlet Moon Empire. Kirill and his group would successfully destroy all of the rune cannons before continuing their investigation. Having seduced Miranda and with the evil eye in his possession, Iskis would now orchestrate his coup. He would use the evil eye to turn both the Emperor and the Prince into fishmen. Kirill's investigation led him right on the trail of Iskis, arriving in the imperial capital of Graska and foiling Iskis's plans. Iskis would manage to retreat with the evil eye to a secret patriarchal faction facility. Miranda, finally realizing what kind of person Iskis was, would stab him in an attempt to kill him. Iskis, however, would survive and instead killed Miranda. Kirill would finally track Iskis down and would arrive at the secret facility, killing him and destroying the evil eye once and for all. With the destruction of the giant tree and the last remaining evil eye, an arms race began as the surrounding nations and powers all rushed to secure the remaining rune cannons and rune shells. Princess Kerselia, the now heir to the Kooluk throne, rather than assuming her rightful place as the Queen of Kooluk, would instead choose to dissolve the empire after seeing the problems which plagued it and the destruction caused by the factional conflicts, believing it to be best to simply let the empire die. Following the collapse of the Kooluk Empire, the Scarlet Moon Empire would take advantage of the turmoil and easily claim a number of border territories. Nothing is known about what became of the remainder of the former Kooluk territories following its dissolution, but it's presumed that it splintered into many small city-states. As for the newly founded Island Nations Federation, They would make contact with the Queendom of Falena at some point between the solar year 337 and 339. The island nations would set up a colony on Nerva Island for the purpose of easier trade between the two nations. The only detail known about the Dukedom of Gaien following these events is that the nation still exists 140 years later in the solar year 449, as they sent an envoy to the Queendom of Falena to pay their respects at the coronation of the new queen. The Island Nations Federation is known to still exist as of the events of Suikoden II, which took place during the solar year 460, as the sailor Amada hails from the region. That's it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any topics you want me to discuss, please leave a comment below and let me know. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll catch you on the next one.